Welcome to the webinar on AAC implementation, parent buy-in. We have Christy and Brenda here today, and I'm going to let them go ahead and introduce themselves. Brenda?
Hi, my name is Brenda Del Monte, and I'm a speech-language pathologist. I have been doing AAC implementation for about 20 years now, and for the last 7, I've had the privilege of having a service delivery model that allowed me to go into homes and into schools. And I have found the number one indicator of successful AAC implementation is parent buy-in. So joining me today is a parent that I've worked closely with her child, and her name is Christy. Go ahead, Christy.
Hi, my name is Christy Rower, and my son Camden has been using AAC since he was 3 years old, and we're now 7. He's using an eye gaze device as well as other pieces of assistive technology, and so we'll talk a little bit about what that looks like with my son.
And just so you know, Christy's background is in education as well, so you'll notice that as she talks, she's got a lot of insight both from the parent side and from the teacher side. So inside of all of us is the desire to be seen, heard, and valued. And not only do we believe that for the children that we're serving, but also for the parents and the stages that they're in on this journey. So we just wanted to remind you that that's the driving force of this relationship and of this equipment. The first thing I deem to be important as a therapist is hearing the story that the families have to tell about how they've gotten to where they are right now in their process. And sometimes that's difficult if you're a school-based SLP. I know I was thinking back about how I did this when I was in schools, and I actually called every parent on my caseload and introduced myself and said, hey, even though I'm a junior high speech therapist for your kids, whatever, I would still or LISP, or sometimes they were for AAC. I introduced myself and opened up the dialogue. You're not going to hear the story at the IEP. You're not going to get the information you need at those meetings that are required. You're going to get them by more human connection than that. But let's start with Christy and Camden's story.
There's my guy. Camden. Isn't he adorable? That's Camden.
Yes.
And Camden was born at 29 weeks. He was early. He was early as a result of me having valley fever and having to be on life support. So really it wasn't a story that involved birth injury or distress, fetal distress at all. It was more that I was not doing well. So I was under the impression that I was embarking on a 3rd trimester with a very healthy pregnancy. So that was a little bit different. Go ahead and
advance the slide, Kristen, and it'll start it. Yeah, there we go.
So, yeah, look at that face. Oh my gosh. So I almost died during childbirth, and as a result, he needed to be born. So all delays were attributed to him being premature. So I was a general education teacher at the time with some counseling background, and so they would say things like, Camden has a brain bleed, and you're like, okay. And they would say, but that's a normal preemie problem. You're like, all right. So he didn't pass his hearing tests, and I'm sure that to some degree, if you've worked with any developmental delay or premature children, you've heard of, it's like, okay, are they deaf? So there was talk about auditory neuropathy. There was talk about a possible dual sensory impairment. We had some nystagmus that was coming. So my response was, how do I get therapy? How do I learn how to help him develop if this is all because of prematurity? And we were just going to therapy that prematurity right out of him. That first year, we did so much to try to make gains, but we just weren't making them. So, and when I say we weren't making gains, my son was 12 months old and couldn't hold his head up. And it's like, what is going on? I finally had a neurologist who would do a chromosomal microarray, which is just it's a blood test to look for many genetic conditions. And we were diagnosed with Palazius-Merzbacher disease. And that is as rare as it sounds. So that's about 200,000 to 500,000 births. It's a form of leukodystrophy. If any of you are familiar with leukodystrophy, it's a white matter condition. So Camden has an inability to make myelin. So, and it's an X-linked condition. So this is past mother to son. I had no family history of PMD, but if you have individuals who are affected with PMD, Camden was diagnosed with the co-natal form of PMD, which is the most severe. You typically die during childhood, and it's all just on that lack of an ability to control breathing, swallowing, feeding, and movement. So when we were diagnosed with this, Camden was 13 months old. This was about that time, that picture of him. And we were just told to go home and love him. He was going to die. That's what we were told. So clearly,
I just want to jump in right there really quick and just say that this is not, every story is rare for sure, but what is common among all of the mothers and fathers that I interview is that the doctors have a diagnosis and not a lot of ideas on how to make this better. Are they still going to make gains? They're very guarded in talking about prognosis, other than to say shortness of life and things that are terribly tragic and you don't even have solutions. So many, many times parents are saying that doctors are the ones with the diagnosis, but therapists are the ones with the strategies, with some options that can bring hope to a grim situation.
Right. And so, so you're asking, I'm asking the neurologist, how will I know what he wants? And they just kind of look at you like, well, you might not know, or how will he play? And it's like, well, he might not play. And I mean, so they just are very, very careful. And it's not like they say, well, that's the therapy job. They really don't. I will say I haven't met a lot of doctors who have a lot of insight on therapy roles and assistive technology and how that can open up a world. And so that really is something that as therapists and teachers, that you're opening up that world for parents. And it was life-changing for us. But Camden comes home with us. It's, we're ready to work through this. And the other thing about PMD that I didn't mention is it's degenerative. So we were told today is his best day. Tomorrow will be worse than today, and he couldn't even hold his head up. And it's like, well, how do we even do this? But it's like, this is our reality. I have 2 master's degrees in education, so I feel very much like I know how to raise children, and I feel like I know how to teach children. I just didn't know how to teach my child. I didn't know how to raise my child anymore. But we had a great DSI. We had she was amazing, and it wasn't because she had a lot of understanding. It's because she was willing to live in the I don't know with me. And it was like, I've heard of these switches, and maybe we could try a switch. And it's like, okay, let's try a switch. And then it's like, well, I've heard of AAC, and I'm not the person to do it, but maybe we could work on that. And so we just started to kind of put it together ourselves. And it's not that she had all the answers, but she was willing to do that with me. And that therapist became a huge lifeline for us, and we made a lot of progress together. But then there were times where it's like, well, how do I do this if he's just going to get worse? I don't know what I'm hanging on to here if it's just going to decline. And that was challenging as a parent. And so it looked like being closed off or guarded, especially to probably educational staff. At this time, he wasn't quite in school yet, but even therapists. Just like I didn't quite know what to say to them because I was still navigating so much of the world. So go ahead, Brenda.
No, so true, all of it. But I would say that there are parts of this that when I came on the scene, and that's going to be the next section here, I'm pretty sure. But I didn't start with saying all of my other kids with Palazius-Merzbacher do this, and that. That's not the reality. And so many of our AAC users have such a combination of medical complications and that create its own unique set of circumstances. But even if they have a more common diagnosis like cerebral palsy, as you well know, just saying like, oh, all my other kids with cerebral palsy can do this or can't do that, that's not a thing. I mean, everyone is so different. So parents don't really want or need or expect to hear about that you've seen all these kids exactly like theirs. In fact, that may in fact be a red flag, because the reality is each kiddo is so different. But they want to hear that you're going to try. Well, here's what I want to try. They want to hear that there's those hopes and those possibilities. And you know, that comes through that relationship as you continue to build and grow, and as we continue to try things and they fail and they try things and they succeed, then you open up that kind of dialogue of human connection and vulnerability where it's like, oh, well, we're going to try it, and if it doesn't work, he's no more less disabled than he was yesterday. We've just learned that that's not a strategy for him. And every failure and success meant we learned more about him, and so it was less pressure on showing specific improvements, but more about understanding him and his body. And when she was mentioning about facing, how do we measure improvement in the face of decline? Right now we're continuing to measure intellectual improvement and literacy improvement and number awareness improvement in the face of physical decline. And that's where the co-treating with motor has been significant. But let's start at the beginning of the AAC evaluation. Go ahead, Christy.
So my sweet DSI, I love her. I still, to this day, I mean, she was such an important, and again, she just lived in the I don't know with me. So if that's all you're doing for your families, know you're making a difference, because that is a huge piece. She said, let's do an evaluation. I'm like, great, what does that even mean? And she's like, it means I'm going to do paperwork and someone's going to call you. It's like, okay, that sounds good, right? So, and I didn't know what AAC was. I had no idea what an eye gaze device was. And then it just so happened that my husband was married prior to someone with ALS, and he said, well, I know what eye gaze is, and it didn't work for her. So even my understanding of AAC was that it was faulty, that it didn't work. And I thought, oh, gosh, I don't know about this. So Brenda came along. She was our AAC evaluator, and she's like, let's try a switch. And I'm like, listen, honey, we've done switches. He hates them because I don't know if any of you have been around assistive technology long enough to know the little white dog that barks with the switch. It terrified my son. I checked it out from the lending library, right? That took 4 weeks to do, and then he hated it. And so every time he saw a switch, he would shake, and he really, really didn't like it. But Brenda was great understanding that, and she said, okay, I understand, you know, we can't do switches right now, but they weren't off the table. And I liked that. Okay, maybe if she thinks she can improve this, that would be great, because I had already taken it off the table, because disappointment was so profound for me at this point with him that if anything didn't work immediately, I very much wanted to take it off the table, like just quit. He can't do that. But then she realized he could do direct select, but that it was difficult, and she knew that it was probably likely to decline. Brenda did, but she didn't say that to me. She just said, let's look at something that would be more long term. So we looked at eye gaze, and he was able to activate an eye gaze device. And we're looking at this scene, this farm scene, and he can find a horse and he can find a dog and all these things that I didn't understand how it was happening. And if you see it says that I had Brenda come for 5 visits. I did, because I didn't. First of all, we looked at a couple different AAC eye gaze devices. We ended up on the Toby for the first one, but the Toby had worked. And after we had seen the other ones not work, I actually asked Brenda to please come back, because I thought maybe the Toby working wasn't real. Maybe maybe he can't make it work again. I was so worried about disappointment. I was so afraid that we were going to do something and then it not be okay. But this idea that inside this little body that was having such a hard time doing everything, that he knew a horse and he knew a dog and he'd asked for kisses from his mom and just all those things. I mean, my word was shock. I was in shock. I mean, as soon as Brenda left my house, I just burst into tears. I couldn't believe that he was inside there. You know, I had read to him and talked to him for so long, and he had heard it all, and I was so amazed. So, yep, there he is, and he was inside there all along. So we were so shocked is the word. I don't even know if I was happy yet. I think I was just maybe a little overwhelmed, I'll be honest. So if you notice that in parents, it can be a very overwhelming thing, because then what do I do? How do I get it all out?
Right. I think there's 2 pieces. One is to make sure that we take our time and validate concerns, and that is because I could have gone in and in the first visit said, the Toby's going to be the best route. Trust me on this. When we get it, you'll see. But what that does is it takes all the power away from the parent, and you don't have buy-in yet. And you've done an evaluation and bought really expensive equipment with a family that doesn't have buy-in yet because they are not believers in the system yet. And it's easy to say, as evaluators, where you've seen all the magic all the times and you trust your gut, and you know you can get the kids there and all that stuff. I mean, even when you're talking about kids with direct select, or you go out to a child with autism and you know that they can probably do touch chat, and that's the one you know and the one the classroom is using, and you just tell the parents, trust me, we're going to do it, you're going to see it's all going to work. And that may work. That may work that he's going to do it and it's all going to work at school. But it's never going to work with the parent unless they have buy-in from the very beginning. And so I am a firm believer. I never do hand over hand. I always have the kids activate the device, show the parents they can do it. They can accurately find vocabulary that's meaningful in the home at the evaluation, or we don't get it, or we don't get it yet, and we come back. It's really, really big to have that buy-in. The other thing is that he's in there, and we did this class at a larger scale with multiple parent speakers, and every parent noted at the end of the evaluation mixed bags of emotions of she's in there, he's in there. All the parents on some level knew the children were in there. Validating that is awesome, and then there is that pressure of how do I provide a way for him to express himself, and how do I get other people to stop talking about Santa Claus when he's there, and all the things that we don't think about when we're talking around and about nonverbal children rather than to them. And that's another soapbox we can get on for another day. But the awareness that your child is in there, that's the very first step, and you end up advocating for that all the way through at this point. So now we have the device, and so for Christy, very much it was like, I need you to show me how to make this work. I do not need a booklet. I do not need a manual. I need to know, how does this look?
Right. So
the tablet, go ahead.
No, this is you.
Okay. So in the state of Arizona, when you get a communication device, you qualify for 12 hours of training. For me, on all the ones that I do that with the result is an eye gaze communication system, I do the training myself. Other times, we have other trainers do systems like Proloquo or Touch Chat or things like that where they know the system really well. They don't necessarily need someone who knows that access method like I do. But for me, I did Camden's training. So the reality is that the Toby at that time didn't have Snap Plus Core, it didn't have Communicator 5, it didn't have Compass, it didn't have all the things that you may think of when you think of Toby at today's date. So we had to create our own. And to be honest, Christy created a lot of it. She went to AAC in the desert here in Arizona. She learned a lot about POD. She sat down and created a lot of a language system that was going to be the best fit. But in the beginning, there's some things that Christy needed that as a trainer I had to tailor to her. Go ahead and talk about in the beginning, Christy.
Yeah. So I'm my background is heavily in psychology and heavily in data. Data makes sense to me, especially when you have a child with a decline, especially when you have any kind of child with a cognitive delay of any kind, or a physical delay of any kind. The progress was so slow that I actually take data in my home, and it's the way that I keep focused on knowing that we are improving or if we actually are declining, and it takes some of the emotion out of it. So for me, I needed that. And I know it sounds odd, but I actually needed to take data. So we had a little data sheet on the fridge where, like when we were working on yes and no, and we were working on certain things, even if it was just choice making, for a while, the Toby was a choice maker for Camden, but it helped us learn the motor plan to activate different areas of the device we did. We would take data, and Brenda would add to the data, and I would add to the data. And in a busy life, it allowed us to communicate as well, because I wasn't always available during therapy time either, and that helped me feel like I was a part of it. There would be times where I'd say, like, what are the long-term and short-term goals? So we would have short-term goals and long-range plans. So it's like, I get that right now we're using it to pick the color of our shirt, and that's all fine and good, but what is this going to do later? How is this going to help us later? And Brenda would just say, it's going to help us because at some point he's going to be able to use a QWERTY keyboard, but we have to be able to look at all the different areas, and we have to be able to activate smaller and smaller buttons. So she took the time to show me what other makeups were, and not just 4 buttons, that 4 quadrants on the screen and telling jokes, because that's what we were doing a lot of. And it's like, that's all fine and good, but how is this going to translate later? And she helped me see that. So she took that time to do that, whereas I'm a high maintenance mom and I'm intense for sure. Like, I'm the first to admit it. She took the time to see that. The other piece was I wanted to continue to learn how to use the device and program the device. So for me, I would tell her, like, hold me accountable. Tell me that and she'd say, okay, so program these pieces. And then it was like, it's okay if you mess up, but just try to program these pieces. And then it helped me become more fluent on how to not just navigate the device, but also program the device. And that was really important for me, because then I felt like I had some control over it. It just can't be a magic tablet that only school touches, because then you're more hesitant to get it out and use it in your everyday life. And that's really the buy-in that you need, because it's putting the eye gaze device on the wheelchair at Costco. I'm telling you, some of the most amazing things we saw was in Costco, which is crazy. But he wants to tell people to get out of his way, or tell his brother to move, or things like that.
The data collection piece, I want to be clear that we didn't have, at this stage of the game, we didn't have 12 core words on there that we were doing. We were doing language function. I want you to tally every time he spontaneously uses the device. I don't care what he says. I don't care what it was. I don't care if he meant to or not. I don't care if we haven't determined if it's exploration or intention. We would create data charts that took the pressure off of performance. He was not at a find the stage, and I'm clear when I'm training parents working with kids. Anytime we tell them to find something, it is a test. Do they know the symbol? Do they know the word? Do they know the location or the navigation? And so when you cannot test until you've taught. And so the taught is exploration. The taught is you modeling. The taught is hiding everything but the correct answer so they can find it to begin with. So the data was that he'll make a choice at snack time when he was eating more by mouth. The data was he'll make a movie choice. The data was that he would converse with his brothers on the previous slide, putting highly motivating things. He has 2 brothers, and they definitely had little boy language flying around, and so we had things like you're a booger and no you're a booger and you're a bigger booger and all those things on pages that were super motivating for him, and it got him looking at the device. It got him interested in the device. Anytime his brothers then reacted to him, that basically you are modeling the value of that human connection. When he name calls his brother and his brother runs over and gets in his face and calls him something else, he's realizing this thing is powerful. Words are powerful. My words are powerful. My words impact my environment. My words bring smiles to people's faces. And so there's so much more there than the data collection. So I just want to be sure that we're not, at this stage of the game, don't get me wrong, I can tell you how many core words he has right now, like 77, I believe, and then how many sight words he has, and how many first letters, accuracy pieces he's got. We take data on all that. But in the very beginning, remember, he just turned 3 when he got it. We're looking at functions of language, and we have to start there. But as we got farther in, then he started realizing that he could control his environment. One of his favorite things is to say, I don't like it when you touch my toddler. So when we would try to model for him, and he would go to that. He would scream and go to that and tell us not to. He got to where he would let me do it because that was kind of my role in his life, but Christy had a different experience.
Right. And so, every time, so I've watched Brenda model on his talker. So I go to model on his talker and he screams at me. And then so my response is, he's screaming at me. I can't touch this talker. And it's like, no. It's not that you can't touch the talker, but we're going to give him a way to tell how he doesn't like it. Okay. So it's like, okay. And then I'm telling you, so I still model, but he'll still tell me how he doesn't like it. Or he'll still look at me, and now he has a valid yes, and he has a nonverbal yes and no, and so he'll tell me no every time I touch it. And it's like, I know, but I'm going to show you how to get to this next one. And I mean, we're 5 years in, and we still, and then we were at the doctor, and Brenda was there, so we both got to witness it. But this doctor didn't look at him or talk to him, and that happens a lot with these nonverbal kids. I've had doctors ask about his life prognosis and life expectancy and things in front of him, and he just kind of looks at me like, yeah, Mom, how long am I going to live? But at one point, and he used 4 buttons. I don't like you. And he told the doctor that he did not like her. And she just kind of stared at him. But we were, we're, Camden, be nice. And then she left and we high-fived his four words in order. We were so excited about the 4 words in order. But then, we had to teach him how to say, I'm sorry. Now you have to say sorry because that wasn't nice. And so I have to say it's shown me how to parent him in a way where if he's not nice, you say sorry, which is just like the conversations I had with his older brother when he was growing up. And so it brought a level of normalcy in a very abnormal way to our interactions, which was really important. And parents crave that with all of their children, even their medically fragile children. So that was really incredible. But actually, Brenda,
I feel like that, at all levels on social language, we tend to put very adult and only socially acceptable phrases on there. And what we don't do is that we didn't remove a way for him to say I don't like you. We just added an I'm sorry. So if he decides to use those words, he has natural consequences to those words, which is someone whose feelings hurt, you have to say you're sorry. All of the social pieces of that. If we tailor a social page to be only appropriate, we're not really teaching them anything. They're just using our phrases, which is why some kids don't find those pages as powerful as the ones that have some less than awesome phrases on there, but that's how the child really feels. That's what he really wants to say. So that happens at all levels of device use, where we need to be sure that we're not just scripting appropriateness, because we're losing the opportunity to teach all those other social pieces that come with inappropriateness. I was at her house one time, and he came home, and the first time I saw him use his medical page was he said something hurt, and he says, it's my, and then it opens up automatically to body parts, and he selected foot. We didn't pretend that he didn't mean that. We didn't pretend that he's never used that before, so he's probably not. And we looked, and his AFOs had been put on too tight, and there were marks on his feet, and we were cooking with gas. We knew exactly that he was 100% reliable when it came to reporting pain at that point, and that was a very big deal.
Mm-hmm. And we noticed that it doesn't, something hurts, it's my foot, and then it's on you. This doesn't look like complete sentences. For my son, having to use his eyes, which if you are working with anyone using an eye gaze device and you have not tried to activate the eye gaze device on your eyes yet, drop everything and go do that. It's really hard. And so, I'm not waiting for him to say, please take off my AFOs. And I'm not modeling that either, because he got the point across. So, it doesn't look like complete sentences, and that's okay. Like, I don't like you doesn't happen very often. More often, it's don't like, because that, and he'll repeat it over and over. And part of that is his motor plan, and part of that is that's how he's emphatic. That's how I know he's serious. And so I'll say, I hear you repeating, give me just a minute, because maybe I'm doing something with another child, or I'm doing dishes or any of the normal parenting things. But I'll say, I hear you. Hang on just a second, and I'll say, oh, I see that.
Yeah, that's his version of inflection, of tantrum, of irritation,
exactly.
of now. Yes, absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Right. And then Camden has had spurts in the hospital. We're about to go into one as well. We've noticed that low-tech works a little bit better for him, and having low-tech options available, like I said, eye gaze can be difficult. He likes to have low-tech options, especially when talking about pain or things that do hurt. He tends to be a little bit more open to low-tech, a low-tech board when those things happen. So always having that option available, that just like, oh, well, I guess it's not working today. If they're very frustrated or very inaccurate, Camden will have days where he's less accurate. We'll get into that more with the decline. I will say that having low-tech options has been a huge opportunity for us. Eye gaze works better in the morning for him now, and by evening we are using more low-tech, but he still has that motor plan available because of his time with high-tech eye gaze.
But I think that's important when you think about being in the school, and that is like when you get to the IEP meeting and you're like, well, they use the device at school. I don't know what you're talking about. It's like, yeah, well, you know what you're talking about? He has a disorder that his eyes actually his eyes begin to dilate as he fatigues. And so his eyes are pretty dilated at the end of the day. But if you don't understand the access method, if you don't understand that that's what he looks like at home at 5 o'clock, and by the way, as a school speech pathologist, how would you know that? So sometimes you'll hear like, well, he doesn't use the device at home. And when it's an alternate access method, you have to think long and hard before you judge the parent on that, because the reality is the access, if it's not direct select with your hand, it's hard and it's fatiguing, and positioning matters and lighting matters, and their body is different by the end of the day depending on the diagnosis. And so it's not always just because they're not trying. It's very much possible that that's a different body that shows up after an hour ride bus home. And remember, we're in Arizona, so we're talking about 100-degree temperatures and all the things. I mean, these kids get off the bus and they're a hot mess. So that sometimes that's all that is access, and it's not about the parents not willing to do AAC, but it's always a gift to say, when the device isn't working, let's do this. Low tech always has to be an option for parents when it just doesn't make sense to have high tech. And that's kind of across the board beyond just Camden here. But for him, he did a lot of commando crawling in the beginning, and we really needed him to do commando crawling. We did not want to increase the curvature of the spine, but eye gaze is best if you're still and in a chair. And so we really wanted to kind of balance the needs of his body with the need to communicate. We worked on a no tech yes no. We started off with single message buttons, one left, one held to the side of a temple, and one up. And when he would move his head to the temple, it would depress and say no. And when he'd look up, even if his eyes just looked up, I would depress the switch onto the top of his head and it would say yes. And so he got that tactile, physical explanation of that eye movement up means yes, and that movement to my right, which tended to be his no. And I mean, we started off with fun things. We read No David, and he yelled No David by moving his head just ever so slightly to the right to tell David no every time he turned the page on that naughty little boy, and it was so appropriate for him and his age at that time. And the yes button, you create other situations where you know he wants to do something, and so you ask him, do you want to? And he says yes, and he gets to do it. It's very cause and effect in the beginning. You slowly move the buttons away and put your hands next to the face, and to this day, he'd probably prefer you to ask him yes/no questions with hands, because you have he has your undivided attention. Actually, we have a really cute video of Christy doing that, but I think it's the last video of that whole thing. I don't know if we want to wait to show that or not, but do we have? Let's see. I'm just looking at what's here. Yeah, let's show this video first, Kristen. The one with the 4 quadrants, just to show where Camden started, and then we'll keep moving.
Okay. So well, let's just see how it goes without me muting everybody. If there's a lot of feedback, I might stop and mute everybody. And just let me know if you want me to pause it to say something in the middle of this. The volume will
We
come
might
through your phone, not through your computer this time.
And we don't need all the video. It's just to show where he started.
Oh, what a farm. What's on the farm? Cock-a-doodle-doo. He had a rooster. With a cock-a-doodle-doo and a cock-a-doodle-doo. Here-a-doo, there-a-doo, everywhere a cock-a-doo. You find the farm? Can you find the farm?
Big stretch. You ready? Ready to go again?
Go ahead and pause it, Kristen. There's a couple pieces that are hard to see, at least on my end. One is that he has to say Old MacDonald on the left, and then he looks had a farm on the right, and that opens up those animal possibilities. So we're just doing some vertical left-right. Can he do a left side of the screen? Can he do the right side of the screen? And this is where we're starting. And it's something that he enjoys. What you can't see in the video, because it's kind of glitchy, is that there's a big red dot that works like a clock, and it shows him how long he has to hold his gaze. There's so much to think about when you're using eye gaze to access language that in the beginning you really don't want it to be about picking a particular item. You want him to realize that if I look at that long enough, it's going to say that word. I don't care what the word is. And they slowly, in that particular game on Toby, when you pick the cow, then the next time you open it up, the cow's not an option. So for me, clinically, I'm able to see, yes, he could get all quadrants of the screen. He can do a field of 6. I mean, I can write all that down as my data, but I'm not making him find a particular animal, particularly because he lives in the city. He's 2 years old, and he's medically fragile, and the farm visit was not frequent at that time either. But I will say that this was one of the pieces of correspondence Christy works. She actually runs a school down here. And so I will often take a picture of his eyes and say, these were his eyes after school today. This is a video of what he could do. So this is just showing you kind of how I'm staying in touch with parents. I don't know what your legalities are with your district and privately texting parents, but I was definitely one of those communicate with parents and apologize later if there was some form that needed to be signed for some reason. But the reality is that them being in the loop makes them 10 times more invested in the system than not being in the loop. His Camden has dual. He lives with his dad part of the time. I don't know why I can't come up with those words. I'm sorry. So I will also shoot his dad some of the same information. This is what he's doing right now. This is what we're doing because I don't do a lot of therapy at Dad's house. And so I know that this is one way that's really, really great way to communicate with parents and families is keeping them in the loop on what you're seeing. Do you have more to add to this, Christy, that communication piece?
No, I mean, I think that if you're not able to text, I will say that what's nice about that is, like, I can't always pick up the phone. I know that as a former educator and now as an administrator, I know how little time you have to do those things, so a text is great. But if you can't via text directly, looking up things like Remind or the Seesaw app so that you are able to have communication in a way that your district will allow. This also, if you see there's a picture here and there's also a video on here, and those are things that I could see later because my response to Brenda prior to this was I see him looking at the eye gaze device at dinner, and he is trying to activate it, and he can't. And I don't know if it's Camden or if it's the talker, because that's as far as my understanding goes to this. I don't know, and I wasn't looking at his eyes dilated, but Brenda is like, boom, his eyes are dilated. This is what's going on. And she lets me see that picture, so now I can see that when his eyes look like this, I immediately pick up low tech, and I've provided another layer of communication for him, but maybe without the picture. Not that I don't know what eyes dilated looks like, but I think it would be a little bit different. And then she was able to show me with the larger buttons, because we have a 15-button option for him too, when he can do that as well. And I think that having it there for when I was able to really look at it, that's important as well.
I think you can go ahead and advance, Kristen. Okay. And
So I'll go ahead and play this video. Sorry it's choppy
okay.
today, guys.
No, it's all right. So this is a video where he has to look and activate the letters without the sound. I don't know how
You can
powerful
see
it
that's
is.
the dot right there, and this one it's blue or teal, where he's looking right now.
Uh-huh.
E H I J K L M N O P.
So this is getting harder and harder to do with his eye. I mean, so the target's getting smaller and smaller. And he, by the way, this is when we switched over to the accent, and we'll get up to, I think it's the next slide or two, where we talk about that. But it allows us. So we started with a 4-button layout. On the Toby, we were about a 12-button, and then it became glitchy. We had to do a reevaluation. At that time, he could better activate the accent, so we switched, but we stuck with word power since he was more familiar with that language system. And then these are the 2 that he's on right now. So he's age 7, and he has all his words on 45 word power. And then he can have the option to go to my big button, and that's to the 15 layout on the left. And that's when things are harder to converge, when those days, weeks, months, hours, minutes that are hard. He actually independently will toggle, from the set that he wants, and how I'm told that at school he mostly uses the 45. He wants more language. I'm also told that as the day goes on, he does tend to go to the bigger buttons, and I love that he has the power to do that, rather than us to question inaccuracies, question intent, question intellect, giving kids the power to do that. Now, nothing that you've ever learned about motor planning or anything says to have 2 systems. Nothing that we know as therapists, we would say, well, we should just, simplify this. We should have him do one or the other. That's just not what he wants. And I know that might sound kind of out there, but honestly, this is when a child has reliable yes/no and you're building his language system, he has a lot of input. And I said, well, what if we do one with bigger buttons, so when you get home and you're tired, it's easier? And he's saying yes, yes, yes. And by the way, this is not like one of those things where no one in the room can tell he means yes except for the mom. Like, everybody in the room knows when Camden's saying yes and no, because he's loud, he's involved, he's spastic, and he's invested in no as well, by the way.
And there's a question. So Shannon
Okay.
and Heidi are wondering if some of the games and the letter deal are things that you created, or if they're on Toby.
Okay, so the phone thing is on Toby. The letter thing is on Accent. So no, I did not create games. I don't invest time, money, intellectual bandwidth on how to do games. Both devices come with iTraining games. Now, so both Toby and Accent, and I shouldn't say both as if there's only 2, and I'm fully aware there's more than that on the market now, but they all come with some type of training eye gaze, and it's to your advantage to get to know those. I will say that I don't use the games as much with Camden now that he's 4 years in, but almost all of my eye gaze users, I do a warm-up on games, and they're just without the pressure of communicating, they're able to warm up their eyes and remind themselves that their eyes are doing the work. It decreases kids that attempting to reach towards the device. They kind of get settled. I have a 15, almost 16-year-old user that, she's on a 45. She can spell. She can do everything. And every time I come, she says, can I do my games? And we do games for about 5 minutes. We just warm up. And then she goes over and she tells me what she thought about the last chapter of Hunger Games, because they're finishing out the trilogy, and she has high cognition, but she needs that warm up on the eye gaze for her eyes. But they are embedded in all systems right now. Grid 3 has games. It comes on, PowerBox or LC Technologies or different hardware. Toby has games. Accent has Tomiko. You can buy Look to Learn, which is on top of things. But what you saw is unique to the Accent, where they have 4 or 5 different games where you start. It's kind of like AAC Genie app, where you start at 4 buttons and they just find the one item on the screen until they're inaccurate. And I very much so at evaluations, I'll get kids that can do it at 8 buttons, and as soon as it switched to 15, they don't seem to converge on anything, and I realize they can't go smaller than 8 right now. So remember that when you're born, vision is the least enhanced system in your body, at least developed, and your vision continues to grow through age 7 and 8. And so we can't, if they're going to talk with their eyes, we don't want to tax their system. We want to be thoughtful about how to use it, and we want to recognize the power their eyes are having, which is to communicate. So with Camden, we were sure not to have him hours in front of the system. So the way that's done is, and I often talk about this, is what it's like picking up weights and holding them at the sides of your hips. If you can't drop your weights towards your knees or pull your weights even up towards your chest frequently, you will fatigue. You'll start to shake. And the eye gaze is like that. Eye gaze devices require 18 to 22 inches from your eyes, where your eyes are having to hold those muscles steady eddy. And so, for example, if Camden's going to pick a balloon, then we're going to bat the balloon in the distance so that he can drop those weights to his knees, so to speak, or we're going to give him the rocket and have him let the balloon go right in front of his face, and that's the equivalent of having his eyes kind of bringing those weights right up to your chest. And I'm not sure this is something I often model physically in front of people in the webinar system. It's a little bit harder to explain. I don't know how that landed, but all to say that eye distance matters, and that the eye fatigue matters, and anytime you're looking at alternate access, I mean, even if you're doing switch access, it's like how far away does that switch? Is that switch? If it's too far, then they can't go get it. They can't continue to go to get it. So your motor person is important, and in this case, the motor person may be the vision person, although I haven't found a lot of vision therapists that know about eye gaze access. So that's just something I've learned along the way. But all to say, I know the question was simple, was where do you get the games? And they're embedded, and it's very important to spend the time to find the games and see even what you can manipulate the settings within the games as well. But let's talk about school. We're getting close to the end here. Go ahead, Christy. Why don't you start here?
Sure. So when Camden started school, he was a little overwhelming for them. Definitely their medical pieces to Camden, but also just the fact that he really craved a lot of interaction. We've met a lot of kids with a lot of different diagnoses, and I think that what is different is that when Camden does talk or gesture, we respond. So he was very used to that. He's very used to being to a lot of interaction. But then there's also this whole medical piece. So they just said, he's a lot. There's a lot going on with him. Most kids, there were, it's a variety of seating systems. He requires, at this point, he required exact positioning. And this is where you OTs in the room, you're vital to this process and to the success of AAC implementation. It is not just communication. It is communication with a body that is going to allow for communication. And for my son, that meant exact positioning. It meant his head being in an exact way. It meant specific seating. It meant specific engagement of the core muscles. And those are so much a part of the OT world. And then it was about translating that to school and them understanding that so that they had the buy-in as well. Because at first we've been met with a lot of no's, and then once they see that he uses this device and it's undeniable, his whole world opened up academically at school as well. Low tech was acceptable, and them understanding that he was very well versed in low tech as well, and that was the first buy-in for them. The Toby became, until Brenda started working with the school a little more, low tech seemed to be the way they wanted to go, and as a parent, I needed to be really open to that, which was great because it was just about them getting to know him. But he was safe. He was very safe at school. He was loved at school, and they really wanted what was best for him. And so once we all understood that, school started off a little rocky, but he got into the swing. And now, see, next slide. And now he's in elementary school. Camden is a second grader. The teacher who's in this picture here, she's like a superhero. And I don't know if you see on my son's face, I think he loves her in a way that he couldn't love his mom or anybody else. It's amazing. Mrs. Marsh is amazing. She bought into the things that were already in place. So she's like, great, he has a high-tech device and low-tech. Let's see how both of those work. And she very much, she didn't shy away from any of those things. So we didn't have a lot of time where we had to get on the same page. She got on the page that was in place to begin with. So if you have someone who is already successful in a system, looking into what that system looks like is important. And she was willing to do that. The device showed high cognition. So she sets the high bar, and my kid works for her high bar. He is adding. He is learning sight words. He is learning science. I mean, when we do curriculum night, he has curriculum. And there was a time where we were told Camden would go to school for friendships, and that's it. And if that's not the case here, he is learning how to read. She's not afraid of the device, of his diagnosis, of his access methods. When things don't work, she asks questions, not just to me, but also to Brenda. I think, again, she's willing to sit in the I don't know. A lot of this is uncharted territory. Having a child who's been on an eye gaze device since, end of 2, beginning of 3, that's different as well. He meets his IEP goals. He really succeeds. I mean, his school, he's thriving in school. A child with a degenerative condition, he has homework. He has all of those things. And then it was time to learn to read. And I'm going to let Brenda do this one.
Well, I know that sometimes when I've gotten to the devices, it's like, oh, as soon as he can tell me that he wants Cheetos, I'm out. I don't need any further training from you. And sometimes as a speech pathologist, you want to go, you knew he liked Cheetos before we got the device. Remember, he only had 3 things he ate. So I do want to dive home just that not only you don't start and end at choice making with AAC. You start with choice making because that's where you sometimes get some buy-in. But, I mean, there is so much more, as we talked about already, the communicative intent, social, rejection, apologies, all of it, asking questions, all that kind of stuff. But sometimes when you get to the point where you're ready to do letters, sight words, spelling patterns, there is that protective piece in parents where they're like, I don't want you to try to teach them to read because if they can't read, then I'm going to face disappointment, and that would be really hard for me. That's not the way they say it. They just say, oh, they can't do that. I've done evaluations before where I say, do they have any reading skills? And the parents will say, oh, no, they don't have any of that. And I put them on something like Predictable or something that's only text and they spell. And it's just one of those things where it's like you can kind of tell that that reading seems mysterious. And by the way, reading's mysterious to all of us. And how all kids learn how to read, it's not one way, and it's hard. But what I found is all of this time that I put into parent buy-in and I put into training and getting everybody, when I was like, okay, here's what we're doing. We're going to make sure we have letter sound. We're going to do this sight words. Now we're going spelling patterns. I expected parents to say no, and I can't, and there was resistance. But I got total trust, not just from Christy, but all the other parents that I was doing this program with. And so we quickly, as he began to go into kindergarten, we switched from Brown Bear to Junie B. Jones because we are not having him read Junie B. Jones. We're having him have the exact opportunities that all kindergartners get when they go to library or when their parents are reading Little House on the Prairie to them before they go to bed. That was back in our day maybe. But I mean where they get to hear literature at a higher level than rhyming words, and they get to have literature that has to do with what's going on in their life. I mean, back in the day, we liked Ramona and those kind of books because they were about girls our age, or they were like, boys with their dogs or whatever. And so Junie B. Jones was like this just misfit of a kindergartner, and I started that with Camden in kindergarten, and
he absolutely loved it. He laughed at all the right places. He could answer some basic questions should I choose to quiz him. But the reality is that became just an enjoyable part and a very normal then part of Christy's life, and they went through many of those books just by doing that.
Mm-hmm.
As a result to having AAC in Camden's life, true to his diagnosis, he's always changing. We have declined. I look now at parents who are beginning this journey with this diagnosis, and their child can say mama, and Camden could too, and you're excited about that for them. And we've lost that. We've lost the word mama, and we could say go, and now we can't say that anymore. But it's a subtle decline. I think that was something that I wasn't expecting, but I also think part of that is because Camden very much believes that his words are important, whether it's words that come out of his mouth or words that come from his eyes. His voice is really important, and the result that is a direct result of AAC. What he says is important. So when we lost the ability to drink by mouth, it was slow, and he kind of over time would only drink for me, and only if I held his head, and he would close his eyes. He had to kind of cock his head to a side. And we talked about it, and I said, what is it? What's going on with the drinking? Are you scared? And he told me hard. And I said, okay, we don't have to do that hard thing now. We have a feeding tube, and we can do things in a different way. And, I mean, for him to be able to say that to me, I don't care if he can take the SATs, but that was a huge moment for us in our life. As we get ready for a big surgery, Brenda's teaching him the pain scale on the low-tech board, so that when he has his spine surgery in less than a month, he's able to use a pain scale to help us. I mean, if that is not the most powerful form of communication, I don't know what is, especially to a parent. So Brenda could tell me we're going to put him in a rocket to the moon at this point, and I'd say, great, sign me up. How do we do it? How are we going to do this for him? So, I mean, reading was absolutely on the table because I trusted Brenda, and even if we failed, I knew it was in his best interest. And that's the kind of buy-in that you need to do this hard thing, because it is really hard. Just raising a child like Camden is hard, but to do all the extra that AAC involves, you have to know someone's in the trench with you, and that was a huge difference for us. But he has 45 buttons or 15 buttons independently, and he chooses when he uses them and when he doesn't, let me just tell you. And he can ask for his low-tech board. He has a subtle yes or no, but it is consistent. People who see it enough learn it, which I think is as much as I can ask for a child that has as many needs as Camden. People in our world have learned to talk to him. And when they don't talk to him, he says, I don't like them, or, get away, or he starts talking to them on his device. And I'll say, yeah, you weren't talking to him, and so people have learned to talk to Camden, which is a huge piece. And people don't talk about him. Like, for example, people will say, well, Camden told me that his head hurts, so we're going to go lie down. Like his nurse will say that, or Camden has to go on a walk, so we'll be back in 15 minutes. And it's like, wow, okay, great, and it's just natural for people to say, I asked Camden and he said that he'd like to have macaroni and cheese. Great. I think that my first feeling with AAC was shock, and then there was some sadness when we made all this growth to a 45 and then 15 and then low tech. But now I feel like it's flexible. There are days where we have really good days, and there are days that are harder days, but all those days are communication days, and that is such a gift in our life. Like, I wouldn't change our implementation a bit, and we're fighting a losing battle, and so I think that's really powerful.
There's a question about how many cells are on his low-tech board. What does a low-tech board look like?
Well, we vary it, but I mean, he's very good at 4 quadrants, depending on what he's using there. But we have, I've put up to 6 or even 8 things on the board. I wish we had a picture. I don't think we have anything that shows his low-tech device or his low-tech board.
No, it's kind of like a frame with the center out of it, and you put Velcro around the 4 corners minimum, and then you can do top. You can do the other 4, meaning top, bottom, left, right. So you can have up to 8 of them there. I don't think we've ever done more than 8 for him.
No, and I don't typically do more than 6 because for me, eyes up means yes. So for him to put his eyes up for that, and you know, it doesn't quite work. But I would say we typically can get the job done with 4. You know, I mean, if we're using low tech, we're pretty tired, and we can typically get the job done with 4. And we've done black screens or blackboards. We've done clear boards. I mean, you know.
And sometimes we'll do like 4 choices, and then there's, you know, something different, and then we realize we need all 4. We need to change all 4 choices because he's not talking about what we thought he was talking about. So it kind of just depends on what it is.
And what that really looks like in my house is if he's lying in his bed and he's upset and he wants something and it's like, well, do you want to get up? No. Do you want a movie? Yes. Well, here are 4 choices in the movie, and then over here in my hand I have or something else. And if he looks at the something else, then I don't have the right 4. And then I just pick 4 more. Yeah.
Brenda, and Christy, there's one video I missed, so I don't know if that's something you would like me to play.
I know we're kind of out of time, so I want to be respectful that it's already been an hour. I think it was just a picture of Camden laying on you, Christy, and he's just showing his
doing
that was it.
That's okay.
Yeah. But I just want to just say that recognizing that the parents are an important part of the story, but also recognizing how powerful your role is as a therapist or as a teacher. As I went through creating this class with multiple parents, parents could quickly point out a therapist, a teacher. Christy has a DSI. She has her Miss Marsh, who's an excellent teacher. She has people in her world that made a difference, and we all have that opportunity. So I think it's just important. Parents are saying, you know, we want to be recognized as a big part of this story, and we want to be given grace when we can't do everything you said, because with every therapist comes goals and comes recommendations, and you're not the only therapist. You know, if they're on AAC, then they've got more than one person, more than one domain they're working on. They've got more than one area that they're looking at. They've got more than one medical problem, probably, even if it's just metabolic, and that what a difference all that can make to your sensory system. I mean, there's physical and obvious challenges, and then there's less obvious, and there's so much going on. And I think it's just really important to recognize that sometimes it's breathe in and out today, and that's all that gets done, and that's okay. You know, if the demands are too high, you will lose the buy-in.
And if you're willing to give that grace and give it openly in a way that you say, listen, I know that things might be really hard, but, you know, or just say, hey, this is a way, or if you've asked them to do something and then you do it as a result or something, and making it with very, very little judgment. I will say that what that looks like now for Brenda and I is it's like, listen, I started working full-time again. It's the first time in 9 years I've worked full-time, and I just don't have a handle on things today. I will tomorrow, but no, I did not. You know, we didn't use the device this day. He didn't want to, and I just didn't have enough time to do backflips for him. But I can say those things now. I can say, you know, that all I was able to do is read to him at night, because that's all I was able to do right now. And it decreases the shame factor. And I think raising these kids is really hard. And I don't know how to say it except saying it's really hard. Even, you know, I think even kids with less needs, typical kids are hard, right? We can all say that. I do think that adding shame onto this just means that we won't touch it at all. Like if it feels like something that's unattainable, we are laced in disappointment already. And so allowing for that grace and celebrating victories, showing the parents when things go really well, that's huge. So make sure you keep doing that.
Right.
Wonderful. We already had people in the chat window thanking you for this webinar and saying how helpful it is and how they'd like to share it with others. And so we're so thankful that you guys shared Camden's story today. And we'll get this link out to you. If it's okay, Christy and Brenda will post the link on our website for folks to view as well.
Absolutely.
Okay. Well, thank you. Any
You're
other
welcome.
questions? We did lose a few just right at around 1 o'clock, probably having appointments and such at school. But if there's any other questions, feel free to email me, and I can get in touch with Christy and Brenda. Let's see if there's any other questions. Oh, any advice for therapists working with parents who were initially on board and are now distant? So something kind of distant, so kind of regaining that peace.
I think a joint session is required. I think them watching the child use the device with the therapist is really invaluable. What do you think, Christy?
I do too. I think, and don't discount other options. Like if you're worried that the device is too much right now for some reason, it's like, do you have a step-by-step? Be like, hey, do you know what we did is we put Simon Says on the step-by-step. So maybe tonight you guys can play Simon Says for 5 minutes, where it's like I don't have to get out the mount and I don't have to get out the device, or just something that helps connection, right? So if you're feeling like you're losing parents and buy-in, keep trying to connect. It doesn't have to be always about, I know that we're all very data-driven and goals, but if we need to take a break from this, be like, I thought maybe we would try this. And then just say, I left the instructions on how to record on the step-by-step here, or here, I'm going to text those to you so you have them if you guys ever want to do that. I think that sometimes taking little breaks and then returning to it. Video is powerful. Brenda takes video. That is a huge piece. I'm not sure if you just don't keep the faces in it, then you don't have FERPA violations, but I do think that if they can see their children continuing to make growth, they'll come back. They will.
Yeah, and I think too, parents go through stages of grief, and and it's cyclical, by the way, because there is no real closure on this. And so stages of grief, they can be at acceptance, they can be at denial, they can be at exhaustion. I don't know if that is one, but I definitely have seen it. And then, they'll be okay as preschoolers, and then kindergarten comes around, and all the mommy and me kids are doing this and that because their kids are going to kindergarten, and kindergarten doesn't look like that for your kid. And you go through another stage of grief, and I'm working with a parent right now whose daughter's about to turn 16, and she's like, what does sweet 16 look for my kid? She will never drive. I don't know what to do. And all of my other friends and my sister who had a baby at the same time I did, and we're doing all these 16-year-old things, and I'm back to being bummed out about all this, and I thought I was over this. And I will say that sometimes parents are engaged, and sometimes there's a little distance, and it's because of their right to go through the stages of grief that is the child that they didn't know they were going to have.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, thank you both again. Another comment, great presentation, and people like the dialogue, like to have the perspectives and your shared experience, your individual experiences as parent and speech therapist, but then that shared experience. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for asking us, Kristen.